What's going on, everybody? It's RoyJ coming at you with a brand new video, and there is a lot happening in the current state of Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now. Between YCS Philly wrapping up as we speak with the final few rounds, as well as Deck Build Pack Wild Survivors coming along to bring some awesome new archetypes and strategies to shake up the meta even just a little bit, but most importantly, finally, the release of the June 2023 Forbidden and Limited list, really rocking the format with some pretty heavy hits right off the bat. With all this being said, of course, there is a lot happening in the current format, and I think it might actually be a bit difficult to judge, especially without actual event coverage just yet, to see which decks perform above the others, but we can always do our best to try and predict now, can't we? So with that being said, dear viewer, I present to you my competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Tier list for the June 2023 format, post Forbidden and Limited list, and Wild Survivors. Starting us off, we have Kashtira, and honestly, despite the hits that it got, I'm going to say it's still likely to be the best deck of the format. So let's go over some of the changes that happened to Kashtira off the ban list. So they no longer have Diablosis the Mind Hacker, meaning they can't rip a bunch off the top and from the extra deck and get that max zone lock that you can use with like the double Shangri-La and such. They got Arise Heart put down to 1 copy, meaning that they can't really bank on going into another one later if the first one gets outed. And of course, they have a Kashtira Unicorn down to 2 copies, making it just slightly less consistent. However, the actual playstyle of the deck hasn't even changed. Arise Heart Pass has been the most popular end board for Kashtira for like the longest time now, because, you know, all the other boards are just really susceptible to disruptions, you know, things like Nibiru and other cards like that, and Arise Heart on its own is a really strong card, so yeah, you only have the 1, so if it does get outed by something like Kaiju, you can't just make another one. And then Unicorn to 2, I mean, yeah, you go from like, what, 20 copies of Unicorn to 19 copies of Unicorn, you're gonna be perfectly fine. So yes, while they did take 3 direct hits in this list, it really doesn't do much to actually affect Kashtira anymore, and so I'm gonna leave it in the tier 1 category. Next on the list is Purely, which shockingly got hit very early on into its lifespan, with 1 copy of Delicious Memory on the list as opposed to 3 copies. This is important because Delicious Memory is definitely the best out of the quick plays because it accesses Purely Plump, which can make itself very large and in turn your Noir very large, and attach your Purely quick plays from your graveyard that you might have hit off of the other quick plays, etc, etc. And now it's significantly less searchable off of things like My Friend Purely and off of the Excavation of the regular Purely. However, similar to Kashtira, the exact playstyle of the deck is basically the same as it was before. You're still going for your Noir and everything like that, and yes, Delicious Memory is the best one and Plump is the best out of the extra deck monsters, but you can easily just go into a Beauty instead, which is a free imperm, and you can still make the Noir with cards like Leap instead of just hard making it, so there's not really too much of a problem. Yes, it loses a little bit of consistency, but they have a bunch of things like the Dark World package to get extra draw power and things like that, so I'm not too concerned about Purely. I think it's going to do perfectly fine, not to mention come Duelist Nexus, it's just going to completely ignore any of these changes at all. Next up on our list is Super Heavy Samurai, and this deck actually took a much more potent hit than Purely did, in the form of losing Super Heavy Samurai Scarecrow in its entirety, and this is a really huge hit to the deck because it was their only Link monster. It's a Link 1, it functions as a free monster reborn as well as a body to keep on board for Soul Peacemaker. It was kind of like the heart and soul of the 1-card combo, and so losing it, you'd think the deck would actually just completely keel over and die, right? But have you considered that there's other 1-card combos or 1.5-card combos you can do with this deck? Like, I think easily you can just supplement a different combo without using Scarecrow that, yes, will probably end up being weaker unless you use a 1.5-card combo, but it's still going to be a really potent combo nonetheless, and you still have access to grabbing things like Spell Canceller or any other really powerful machines that you can search. So I'm going to put Super Heavy at the top of tier 2. I wanted to put it at the bottom of 1.5, but I think namely the representation of the deck is going to take a severe dip outside of people that really want to make the deck work, and I mean, obviously, if you do enjoy the deck, you're going to find a way to make it work whether people like it or not. I think it could easily still continue to see some really nice success. The main issue is that you just can't play as many hand traps because you have to play a bit more engine, but there's so many flexible engine cards, even in just monsters for this deck, that I think it's not going to struggle too much in the later formats. So I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt, and I think even without Scarecrow, Super Heavy can be a pretty imposing deck. Next on our list, we have Branded, and Branded, honestly, despite losing Expulsion, is kind of just exactly the same as it was before. Keep in mind they still have Albion the Sanctifier Dragon, which, I mean, a lot of the time they were putting it on top of Expulsion to dodge things like Bell, DD Crow, Bystials, etc. But Branded at the end of the day is still Branded. I mean, I'll put it above Super Heavy because I think it's going to have more representation than Super Heavy. but I really don't think it's changed too much from this list, even without Expulsion. Like, the biggest thing you lose, other than the Gimmick Puppet lock from Expulsion, because you can just do that again, is you lose, like, some random Quem Cartesia plays. So yeah, I'm gonna put it at the top of tier 2, though it can prove me wrong, honestly, I don't know. Next up, we have Sword Soul, and I actually want to put Sword Soul, not up there, but in the tier 1.5 category. So Sword Soul is a huge winner from this list, not only because it went completely untouched, but also because it got Danglong back. I've seen a lot of people actually question me like, oh, what does Danglong even do for the deck? How do you even make the Danglong? Well, basically, one of the easiest ways to make Danglong and one of the most efficient ways is, say you open a Shuna or Adhara alongside a Moyi or a Taya or whatever, and you get impermed on your Moyi after specialing the Tenyi. Well, depending on the Tenyi you go for, you can like link the Ashuna off into the Monk and then use it to summon Adhara, or you can just take the Adhara and that level 4 and immediately go into Danglong. Danglong will then trigger to add the 9 paths of the Yangzing, 9 pillars, 9 paths. It's the counter trap, y'all. And then on top of that, you get the effect of whatever level 4 you used. But keep in mind, Danglong can also dump any worm from your deck to the graveyard, which is really good in combination with Ashuna over Adhara, because you'll have that Monk to trigger any of your Tenyi effects in the graveyard. And then it also floats into a Yangzing directly from your deck if it's sent from the field to the graveyard. I think we can definitely see some more heavy combo-focused builds of the deck, similar to how it was when like Auroradon was around, just people finding ways to utilize Danglong to its maximum potential, because getting protection from Evenly or Dark Ruler without having to rely on Baron is pretty huge, y'all. Not to mention, there's probably some like really strange Boxia plays that you can utilize Danglong with in order to make it easier instead of having to rely on opening the Tenyis. And then not to mention, you can use it alongside Chao Feng to lock off light, similar to with Boxia, but also getting that Danglong float at the same time and the counter trap. So I think that you can do some really scary stuff with Danglong. We'll just have to wait and see what people crapped up with, but I would like to put it in the tier 1.5 category. Next up on our list is Dark World, and it does go off pretty hard when it goes off, but let's see, Droll is still a card, Shifter's still a card, the Bystials are still cards, Rise Heart is still a card even if it's at 1. I mean, there's a lot of things hard countering Dark World right now. It'll definitely have its time in the spotlight, but we just keep going into formats where people are playing direct counters or are direct counters in general to Dark World. Maybe eventually, once Castro eventually fizzles out and then Shifter becomes like a lot weaker of a card, we'll see a lot more play with Dark World. But right now, I don't think it's the best time to try and take it to an event. Alright, starting off our Wild Survivors decks, next up we have Dinosaur. And Dinosaur is about to get really awesome. While not all of the Transcendrake archetype out of Wild Survivors is super helpful for Dinosaur as a deck, it's more so like its own pure thing, right? Ground Zeno and Zeno Meteoros are insane. The deck now has incredibly easy native access to Baron without having to play the Drak Aolo or the Scrap package, and they also get an additional copy of Fossil Dig that also pops Baby. Like, who thought this was a good idea? The deck definitely did lose Cyframe Gear Gamma on the Forbidden and Limited list, which is a bit of a damper. Not to mention, we still have not gotten Misk back to more than 1 copy per deck, but a lot of the combos now, especially with Ground Zeno, don't even require Misk to be a part of it, and it's just a nice thing to have for protection, and you can play through Ash on your Misk without Gamma by utilizing cards like Ground Zeno. It might be a bit of a headstrong jump here, but I think that Dinosaur can easily be in the tier 1.5 category after Wild Survivors, and this isn't even including Evolzar Raz out of Duelist Nexus, which is going to be massive for the deck as an endboard piece, but I easily think that Dinosaur will be a very scary threat, especially for people that don't know how to play against it, and so I think it can end up being a pretty deserving deck of the 1.5 category. Next on our list is Sprite, and so Sprite is a really interesting case study here. So they lost Gamma, which was really good protection for certain plays, so that means they also lost Emergency Teleport, which was another one of their really good extenders for Gamma, and then they also lost 1 copy of Sprite Starter, which is easily the weakest hit on them. But I think Sprite is probably one of the only other tier 1 decks of the format. Like, let's be real, no matter how many different level 2 extension packages you hit for Sprite, they're gonna find a way to play another one. Like, they can literally just play like the Lilybell package again if they really wanted to with Light Stage, because Light Stage is at 3. Not to mention, they can just cram more hand traps and stuff in, and they also have like Fallen of R Gyros and stuff like that for another extender. I think the deck is perfectly fine. The game plan is exactly the same because Sprand and the Nimble package were left untouched. Overall, I think Sprite players, especially ones that are wanting to build the deck in paper after playing it online because Blue went down to like $20, are eating pretty damn good. Conveniently speaking of eating, here's Madolche, and I think Madolche is probably going to stay in the tier 2 category, y'all. In fact, I'm gonna bump it down to Rogue. So yeah, Madolche didn't receive any hits or anything like that, direct or indirect, obviously. So why am I bumping it down to Rogue? Well, I realized that Madolche, it has its moments, but it never really does more than the definition of a Rogue deck. A tier 2 deck is a deck that a lot of people, given like actual time to learn the deck, can probably take to an event and at least reasonably see a top. Madolche is one of those like die-hard pilot decks where you have to like know every in and out of the deck, and you have to sweat your ass off in order to receive your top cut, and because of this, it only receives a top here and there. I think Madolche is still fine. It definitely does get hurt though by certain things like Droll at the right time, or Shifter. While they can play it, it can also hurt them a little bit because they want to keep some of their resources in the graveyard. I think there's way too much that hurts Madolche right now as opposed to helping it, so I don't think it's the best choice to play right now. Next up we have Drytron, and Droll is still a card, Shifter's still a card, Rise Heart's still a card, Bystials are still cards. However, they're still incredibly strong if they can go off. Like, you can make some really nasty stuff with Drytron, as I always mention, to the point where essentially if your opponent doesn't have the out, then it's going to be a really big problem for them. The main issue keeping them in tier 2 though is the fact that there just are so many outs. Next up is Eldritch, and while I do think that trap decks are in a really good spot right now, as always, yeah, Eldritch is still having to deal with things like Shifter and a Rise Heart and Bystials and things like that. But I mean, hey, Lightning Storm to 2, everybody. Alright, so here's where things get really, really juicy. So, Vanquish Soul is a new archetype coming out of Wild Survivors that a lot of people know because they really enjoy the deck, and a lot of other people know because it's the first deck to have 7 ultra rares in a deck build pack. Ridiculous price aside though, I think that Vanquish Soul is actually a really competent deck that a lot of people don't like to give it credit for because it doesn't really do like a bunch of stuff. But I think it has enough plays, especially with hand traps being even more potent after this list due to certain consistency hits, to put it in tier 2 above Dark World. So they have some really consistent 1-card combos that, while they aren't like the most like potent 1-card combos, they're not like ripping apart your opponent's entire hand and stuff like that. Like, they're doing some pretty nice stuff, and they have a really nice resource loop on top of that. Plus, they have some really nice native access to cards like Fenrir as really awesome endboard pieces, as well as consistency cards because they do replace themselves in hand. And it's like another deck that can play a million hand traps, but it can also make use of those hand traps for their reveal effects off your Vanquish Soul cards. One of the nastiest parts about the deck, though, is the fact that they can play There Can Be Only One, which is one of the most gross back row floodgates in history, and it shuts off a lot of decks right now. Like, if you flip this card against Sprite, Kashtira, Purely, Sword Soul, Dinosaur, Super Heavy, like, there's over 10 plus decks right now in this list that can get hit by Tick Boo and absolutely explode. Combine this with cards like Baguska made by Parallel Exceed while sitting on your Rock of Vanquisher and your nice little comfy resource loop in order to go for an OTK with access code next turn, and you're going to slow down the game enough to where you don't really have to worry too much about what your opponent has to stop you. It definitely stays in tier 2 because, again, what it does isn't like a lot, and also it's going to be very underrepresented in my opinion because it's going to be so expensive. But I think it's a really solid deck, and it'll definitely surprise you with a few tops here and there in my opinion. Next on our list is Flu, and honestly, this might be, I don't know if this is the first time, but this might be one of the first times we've seen 4 decks in a 1.5 category. In fact, let me do some switching. I honestly think Sword Soul might be enough to be in the tier 1 category for this format because I want to fill up the tier 1.5 category a little more in a bit. But yeah, Flu is in a pretty decent spot. I mean, yeah, cards like Droll hurt, but just open Shifter and then you won't complain. Especially because Shifter is not just good at shutting down Droll, but also good against a lot of the decks right now. And remember kids, double Empan and Raiza are still really strong. Next up we have Exo Sister, and I think Exo Sister is always going to go into the Rogue category until we get another format like Tier. I never really liked the deck, as I always mention, and I really don't think it's that amazing because it literally ends on like 2-3 banishes. I mean, hey, at least you do have that, what's it called? One of the Tamas, the new spirit guy. He's pretty cool. Next on our list is Labyrinth, and this is the main deck that I wanted to talk about going up into the 1.5 category. I think that Labyrinth is going to be really, really nasty. Again, Trap deck's going to be really solid right now. And without cards like D-Barrier or anything like that getting hit, Labyrinth went basically untouched. I mean, like, it's just only going to get better and better, especially as a lot of the other decks actually get weaker because of the list, making them more susceptible to cards like your Floodgates as well as your Disruption Traps. Not to mention, ever since Cyberstorm Access, it's been topping like every single event except for like 1 or 2 in the regional category, so I really think that this deck's kind of under the radar, quote unquote, while still being one of the better decks you can play. So yeah, I'm going to put it in the 1.5 category. Next up on our list is Mannadium, and I think Mannadium, until Duelist Nexus, will probably stay in the tier 2 category. Again, it's pretty fragile overall, and it can't really play very well under cards like Droll. They literally make Singularity pass, apparently. I think the stuff that it can do is pretty cool, and Vicious Astround is a really nice card, but I don't think it's enough to warrant being in a higher tier yet. Next up on our list is Mathmech, and man, dude, Mathmech's Circular to 1 is so nasty, and it absolutely doesn't change the deck at all. Like, again, similar to like Castra Unicorn, it's like, oh, you went from like, what was it, 9 copies of Circular to 7 copies of Circular, oh, woe is you. Yes, I'll bump it down to tier 2 because of that, because it means it's a little bit more fragile, because Circular is the best card in the entire deck, but it can still keep doing plays, and it can still do everything else that it was doing. It's just a consistency hit, it's not an end board piece, and you're perfectly fine, not gonna lie. Next on our list is Makonko, and y'all, Makonko ain't been doing shit right now. I honestly expected a lot more from the deck, but really, it's either representation or people just aren't really wanting to like play it at a higher level event. And I get that it can be risky, but I'm surprised we haven't even seen like Libra Makonko pop up anywhere. So yeah, it's going to go in the bottom of the road right now. Next on our list is Naturia, and Naturia did lose 2 copies of Sacred Tree and a copy of Runic Fountain this list, which I found really interesting that they hit Sacred Tree. Like, I thought Naturia was fine. I don't think it was like dominating the top tables or anything like that. Like, even Mathmech was doing better than it. And hitting Sacred Tree is pretty annoying for the consistency, because yeah, if you draw it, you have to open a Runic card as well in order to like properly use it, and you don't really have as much follow-up play as you did before when you had multiple Sacred Tree to dump off Camellia. But you can still do the Sacred Tree stuff, or do your combo stuff, sorry, with the 1 Sacred Tree on turn 1. You can still make 1 card Nat Beast and stuff, like, it's not a big deal. And the Runic Engine, with only 1 less Fountain being the only hit, is still going to hard carry a lot of aspects of the deck. So I think that it can still be in the tier 2 category. Like, I think it's still perfectly fine. It's just going to be a little bit harder in the crackback turns in case you get your board broken. Next up on our list is Movella's, the new food hungry burger based ritual archetype coming out of Wild Survivors. I do not have high hopes for this deck. I'll put it in the upper part of Rogue because I think someone's going to at least try to experiment with it, especially with Drytron and stuff like that. But I think out of all 3 of them, of Wild Survivors, this is by far the worst of the archetypes. It's not a bad deck, it's just really strange, you know? It's a bit too specific for its own good, and a lot of the time you'd rather just be wishing you're playing a different ritual deck. But at least you can summon CR Hungry Burger and flex on your opponents in style. Next up on our list is Dinomorphia, and if you've been following me on Twitter or checking out my live duels, you'll be seeing that I've been playing a lot of Dinomorphia lately, and I really think that this deck is super solid right now. I'm going to put it below all of these decks in tier 2 because we don't really have any records of these decks after the new format, sorry. But I think that Dinomorphia is a super slept on deck right now. A lot of decks have trouble outing Rexsturm except for like Runic exactly. And if they don't have those very specific outs like Sword Soul having Vashuda or like certain decks playing Druisworm and stuff, they're going to be in for a very rough time. Not to mention the amount of times you can either make a new Rexsturm or recycle the other one with like an alert or whatever. It's just so good, and it's a really big threat on board. The main issues with the deck come with consistency on occasion, mainly due to almost always needing the fusion traps in order to actually play, as well as drawing into your main deck monsters that you do not want to draw. Ugh, Diplos, I hate you so much. But these are easily supplemented by cards like Wannabe, because Wannabe is just an absolute monster for any trap deck. But in Dinomorphia in particular, it is your lord and savior. Not to mention, with Super Heavy falling off a bit, I'm pretty sure Evenly is going to see a really big rise to power in the format again, and so I think that grabbing Evenly off of Wannabe is going to be insane, and I think that Dinomorphia is going to be a really awesome deck that you're definitely going to have to watch out for if you don't want to get stomped. Next on our list is Dragon Link, and I mean, it's fine. Like, it's still a perfectly competent deck, so I'll put it like up there in tier 2, I don't know. We just don't really see much representation from Dragon Link is the big thing, and if we do, it's just not in the top cut. So I don't really know what to say about it. It's just Dragon Link, you know? Next on today's episode of packing the tier 2 category to the fucking brim is Traptrix, which is going into the tier 2 category. I think Traptrix is pretty solid, though. I'm gonna put it under Drytron and Dynamorphia, because the big thing about Traptrix is that you don't really have any super insane wombo plays. You set up a modest little end board, and you kind of just pray your opponent doesn't have evenly matched. And a lot of decks right now don't really fold to a couple of trap holes. Like, Tear Limit definitely folded to Gravediggers a lot, and decks like Castro you can hit with Floodgate Trap Hole and stuff like that on occasion and get a really good play there. But a lot of decks need more than just those little bit of trap hole stuff and then like the rank 4 2 you put on board. It's just overall kind of just okay, but there are definitely a lot of better decks that you could be playing right now. Next on our list is Sky Striker, and hey, Sky Striker players, I hate you. I don't like Sky Striker. I've never liked the deck. I mean, it kind of like deserved to die years ago. But you did get 2 engage now, and you have 3 copies of Multi-Roll, which I think is a really big one. So I'm going to put the deck at top of Rogue, because I think that Sky Striker, especially Runic Sky Striker in particular, that deck's really nasty. I think those can actually see a top here and there. The main issues, you just have to watch out for cards like Anti-Spell and Magic Deflector right now because of Purely and such. Otherwise, I mean, hey, good on you, y'all. Good on you. Next on our list, we have Tri-Brigade variants, specifically Bird Up most of the time because it's the best one, and man, I love Bird Up, I love Tri-Brigade, but it's not really doing anything right now, y'all. You can absolutely try and take it to a lower tier event and probably see some success with it, but with Shifter and Droll and all that crap running around right now, it's just going to be a really bad time. Next on the list is Marincess, and Marincess has actually been making waves lately. Sorry for the joke, but I think I'm going to put it above Drytron, above actually Dynamorphia in the tier 2 category. I think it's a really solid deck. The main issue is that you gotta like watch out for things like Shifter and Droll, but I'm pretty sure you have plays around that. Not to mention Zealantis wiping an entire board is still really strong, and so I think the tier 2 category is a pretty nice place for it. Also, in order to make room, I think we're going to be bumping Dark World down to the Rogue category. I think I'm actually going to put it under Sky Striker. Forgive me, it's literally just for making room, because I just realized that I probably need to shift some things around a little bit, because we need to make room for Plant Link, or Rika, Sun Avalon, whatever you want to call it. This deck is still really solid. I mean, like, it can play a lot of really nasty floodgates like Rivalry, and honestly, I think I want to put it above Drytron, but I think I'll actually put it above all of these. I think this is a really strong deck right now. It's definitely a lot cheaper now too because of Maze of Memories, so you don't really have to worry about the prices like that. And I think that if you're well versed in the deck already, you can definitely see some event tops with this deck. And finally, we have Tear Limit, which I will put above Makanko, below Eldritch. Tier is still basically dead unless you have like the most godlike luck ever, like that one YCS topping guy. Otherwise, please just play something different. Alright, y'all, so that is going to do it for my June 2023 tier list, post Wild Survivors, and the June 2023 Forbidden and Limited list. Honestly, this was definitely a really tough one because I kind of wanted to even it out a little bit, so some of these might be a bit off, and also, of course, this is just a prediction for the most part. We haven't seen any event coverage, of course, with a list like this, but let me know your opinion down in the comments below because that's going to do it for the video. If you liked it, please sure to leave a like as well as put this video and the channel into recommended, and if you like this content and you like it like the rest of my tier list, then perhaps consider subscribing because we're under 5,000 subscribers by the end of 2023, not to mention it supports the channel more than anything else, and it's absolutely free. Also, if you want to support me directly and get some awesome TCG merchandise in the process, check out Tapio cards in the link in the description. Use code Aurora5 at checkout for 5% off as well as to support me directly. Once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.